I hate it when people say that something is all style and no substance, because it implies that style isn't substantive in itself, begging the question, what exactly is style? Pikachu's Vacation is a bright, poppy, entertaining short film with a minimal narrative and very distinctive visual tone. I could describe Dead Leaves in the same way, and yet I doubt that many would think of them in the same context, even though both might be accused of having all style and no substance. Clearly these are different styles, but how would you go about explaining that difference? The phrase all style and no substance annoys me simply because style is such a nebulous and uninteresting word to use in describing something critically. One of my favorite writers, film crit Hulk, often substitutes the word style with texture, as it's much more clear that every different film has a distinct one. You might be able to describe a film as being textured, but like when talking about taste, this lends itself more naturally to the follow-up question. Well, just what texture does the film have? Is it rough? Smooth? Soft? How does it feel? Pikachu's Vacation feels warm, inviting, and amicable. It is intended to be enjoyed by as many people as humanly possible. After all, the characters themselves are not human, yet every expression and reaction is couched in human emotional logic. No matter who you are, you should be able to understand and relate to the Pokemon in this film, because all of them are motivated by things which you or the people around you might be motivated by, and take actions on the basis of emotions or rationale which are easy to comprehend. Because there's no actual dialogue in the film, it can transcend even the particular cultural nuances of language. Every part of the film, from the bright, summery color palette to the inventive setting, to the monster designs, which are at once instantly recognizable as common animals which nearly everyone has some understanding of, and yet distinct enough to etch themselves into your memory, is crafted in a deliberate attempt to sculpt this particular texture, which is ultimately unique to this short. Other works convey similar feelings, but if you want to feel the exact texture of Pikachu's Vacation, you have to watch that specific movie, because there's nothing else, even among the other Pikachu shorts, which feels exactly the same. Dead Leaves is similarly a deeply textured piece of work, and unlike Pikachu's Vacation, its goal is clearly not to be as inviting as possible. In fact, I think it goes out of its way to alienate most of humanity. At the time that the film was being advertised in magazines, reviewers were always quick to point out the existence of a character who is literally shaped like a dick and spewing jizz out of his head. You could easily miss this character entirely if you aren't paying attention, as he's not especially important and about 70,000 things are happening on screen at any given moment in this movie, but the reason he's always brought up is that he represents the far extreme of what this film has done to give itself a wholly unique texture. It's unfortunate, I think, that so many reviewers have focused on the presence of outrageous potty humor and crass sexuality in this film, because those things are not necessarily the point. They stand out because there aren't a preponderance of other films which would see fit to include those elements, but you're missing the forest for the trees if you fixate on that part of the film alone. Of course, I think that was also a lot easier to do back in 2004, when people weren't so familiar with the name Hiroyuki Imaishi. If you've heard of him, it's most likely because he directed Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, Kill La Kill, Panty & Stocking with Garter Belt, and Space Patrol Luluco, while also having founded Studio Trigger. You'll also be familiar with this work if you've seen Fooly Cooly, as he directed the insane 5th episode, and has provided no shortage of phenomenal animation work across a long career at Studio Gainax, and as a freelancer on plenty of other series with one of the most recognizable styles in existence. Dead Leaves was his full directorial debut, which he led over at Production IG, and he's hardly the only animator on the project to have gone on to widespread recognition as a god of stylistic animation. Some of the most mind-bogglingly incredible action cuts in this film come courtesy of Takeshi Koike, for instance, who would go on to direct the cult-beloved Red Line, as well as define the visual aesthetic of the modern Lupin III incarnation, starting from The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, and to direct the latest 2 films from that franchise. Future Kill La Kill character designer and frequent animator under Imaishi, Sushio, can also be found on this project, and when you become aware of these things, they are suddenly incredibly obvious. These animators do not appear on this film for no reason. While their styles are different enough for each to be recognizable as their own, it's also clear that each of these people's natural inclinations have a similar texture to one another. It's clear that there's some shared influence and interests. Most of them are probably huge fans of legendary animator Yoshinori Kaneda, whose classic Birth OVA is one of the most similar things to Dead Leaves that I can think of in terms of intentionality. And yet even still, the texture of that film is very different. Imaishi works in this totally other color aesthetic, which it's more tempting to compare to Mike Mignola's comic book art than it is to the 70s and 80s anime and manga from which his storytelling proclivities obviously stem. He and his cohorts have never been shy about making their influences readily apparent in their work, and yet in spite, or maybe even because, of Dead Leaves being Imaishi's debut, do, it feels the most thoroughly his out of anything he's worked on. After all, in the same way that these animators were clearly chosen with deliberation, everything that happens in the movie also happens for a reason, even if the overall tenor of the story is that of total chaotic anarchy. It's not as though there's any singular way in which it most makes sense to convey a sense of chaos, and yet Imaishi has chosen to make a film about a pair of superpowered aliens with no idea who they are being captured and placed into a prison, which is very obviously even more of a metaphor for authoritarian control than it is a literal prison. Even taking a shit is rigidly controlled, as if literalizing the idiom telling me when and where to shit. Sexuality is rampant, but is used as a means of liberation. A character with a drill for a dick is integral to escape, and we'll be seeing plenty more drills in Imaishi's future, while pregnancy gives birth to a psychic baby who makes the prison break possible. Much of this film's messaging will go on to be spelled out much more clearly in Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt, where 5 minutes are dedicated to a song about the joys of anarchy. And both shows make it clear that they are the way they are because they are themselves anarchic and indebted to the random whims of thoughts in Imaishi's brain. Pointlessness is the point, so to speak, and so the notion of it is challenged, not with any seriousness or pretension of depth, but merely for the sake of itself. It's a tautology of anarchy. I don't have much interest in trying to over-explain or oversell this film. Whether or not you'll be interested in watching it should have long become apparent to you just by looking at the images on screen. If this texture of visuals and concepts appeals to your sensibilities, then you've already got it on your plan to watch list, and if it doesn't, then there's no reason that you should bother. This movie is exactly what it looks like, and that will either excite, terrify, or bore you. Whatever the case, the thing is only 45 minutes long, and nearly every single second of it is exactly as intense and exciting as every other second. I'd have to show you the whole thing to totally spoil it, but I'd also like to leave some surprises for you, so that's all we're gonna show. Let me know if you want to see more short recommendation videos like this, and be sure to support me on Patreon so I can keep making videos in general. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.